The Duke of the North pressed the young woman against the wall, caressing her soft cheek and warning her to never think of leaving him. The heroine tried to explain to the Duke that things were not as they seemed, but he silenced her and whispered for her to call him by his name, instead of his title. Beneath his black hair, his crimson eyes shone with a dazzling light, making her feel as if she were about to be devoured. The sound of the biting wind seemed to fade away, creating the illusion that only the two of them were left here in the entire world. The heroine screamed with delight. This author's writing was simply divine. Just as the Duke was about to get closer to the girl, at the most exciting part, a maid interrupted her, announcing a guest from the Imperial Palace. Clicia Meggerino was the only daughter of Viscount Meggerino, born in the tranquil Shumaran estate. And guess what? Clicia considered herself the founder of the Duke of the North Research Center at Shumaran Academy. In other words, she was deeply in love with those Duke of the North themed. Holmosi Novus. The heroine's biggest dream was to marry the Duke of the North. The maid was very worried about her lady, hoping the visitor from the palace wouldn't bring bad news. Clicia was sure everything was fine. After all, she had never even been to the capital, let alone the Imperial Palace. But things were about to get very complicated. The handsome blonde man told Miss Clicia that she was exactly as he had imagined. Then, he dropped a bombshell, saying His Majesty wanted a divorce, which left her completely stunned, as she had never even met him. It turned out the temple had made a mistake when registering the marriage. So according to official records, the heroine was currently married to the emperor. Things couldn't get any worse. According to imperial law, after a divorce, the former empress must live in seclusion for 10 years. In return, His Majesty offered generous compensation, promising vast lands, wealth, and an estate. Clicia's scream echoed throughout the estate. She called it utter nonsense. Her fiery temper erupted, and only her father, Viscount Isaac Meggerino, could contain her rage. After speaking, the handsome blonde man bowed and took his leave. The heroine indignantly asked her father if he wasn't furious about this treatment, since it wasn't them who made the mistake. Her father replied that they could not defy an imperial order. In the past, Isaac Meggerino was a commoner knight who was granted the title of Viscount and an estate 10 years ago for his military achievements. He was a truly loyal subject, ready to give his life for the empire at any moment. But now, Clicia felt it was all meaningless. You see, the heroine had her own plans. She wanted to marry the Duke of the North. Just as Clicia began to wallow in self-pity, a phoenix flew in, saying it was terrible to be bound by human rules. The heroine was very excited to see cuckoos. The bird told her not to be discouraged and reminded the lady once again that she was part of the great bond that controlled the flow of the world. The girl couldn't listen to this nonsense anymore, so she decided not to sacrifice herself as her father had done. The lady decided to go to the temple and raise hell to get them to fix things. If that didn't work, she would storm the Imperial Palace. Clicia needed to see for herself what this guy who was supposedly her husband looked like. The heroine disguised herself as a young lad, planning to sneak into the stables. But right at the entrance, her father appeared, fully armed and on high alert. Isaac saw through his daughter's plan, so he declared that if she really wanted to go, she would first have to defeat the Red Lion. Clicia took down her old man without breaking a sweat. She had already mastered the flame rune, enough to protect herself in a fight. No problem. A servant suggested the Viscount send someone after the young lady, as she had already passed through the gates. But the knight just sneered and refused. They had already done everything they could to stop her from running away. It was time for Clicia to make her own choices, time for her to test herself with a real challenge. The city of Muda was known as a traveler's paradise and the empire's largest trade hub. It was the only route from the south to the capital, so merchants and all sorts of travelers converged here, meaning it was always crowded and flush with cash. 3 days later, Clicia finally arrived there in person. The heroine's horse smelled some delicious meat and tried to snatch it, but she yanked back on the reins, telling Shukran to get a grip because no one could know he was a hybrid horse. Once they reached the capital, they could have a big feast. Then the heroine went to rent a room. and ordered some food. Despite her somewhat frail appearance, she devoured the meat like a grown man because she was starving. Clicia wondered if she should leave some for Shukran, but she quickly changed her mind, as the risk was too great. They could be discovered. Shukran was a hybrid horse, a species of ancient creatures that were a mix of dragon and horse. In other words, you could call it a sacred beast. A beast like that was hard to find outside the royal family, but Clicia was lucky enough to have just picked it up on the side of the road. She had literally stumbled upon it on the street, right in the middle of a battlefield. The war with the Servant Empire had lasted for 10 years, and Clicia grew up amidst the flames of war. Her father often took her to the battlefield as a child, and when she was 10, the war finally ended. But now, just as Clicia had decided to enjoy her youth, they were telling her she had to be exiled for another 10 years. The heroine truly hoped the Emperor was a reasonable man. Muda was the largest trading city in the Furza Empire, and they were the ones who managed it. In some ways, they held even more power than the royal family or the temple. We're talking about the Tom Holdings Company, and the crazy thing is, it was all in the hands of one young man. As Tom was listening to his subordinate's report, something caught his eye, the horse to be precise, so he asked how it got here. The stable hand ran to his boss and explained that a guest at the Tom and had left the animal. He probably wasn't from a noble family, more like a commoner. A cunning smile played on Tom's lips. The black-haired man ordered them to find out as much as they could about this guest. Luke decided to ask his boss why he was suddenly so interested in the horse. Tom explained that it wasn't just any ordinary horse. It was a hybrid horse, which meant he was no ordinary person, leading them to believe the guest had his own reasons for hiding his identity. But if this was a spy the Emperor wanted to plant among them, things would get tricky. Late at night, our heroine was sound asleep. She had no idea that robbers had broken into her room. Looking at the girl, the gang thought she looked more like a runaway, noble than a commoner. But that couldn't fool the legendary Knight brothers, because nothing worth stealing could escape their eyes. They were sure the girl wouldn't wake up, as she had ingested a large amount of forest mushroom powder in her food earlier, so they could take all her belongings without any problem. The gang thought they had hit the jackpot, finally finding someone who wasn't broke. The robbers didn't realize the girl was already awake and reaching for her weapon. One of the guys froze after hearing a thud and the distinct sound of a body hitting the wall. He had no idea what was happening, while the heroine was already preparing. For her next attack, Clicia grabbed him by the throat and slammed him hard against the wall. She asked in a cold voice how they dared to disturb Clicia. As a result, Clicia effortlessly subdued the two thugs, who were now kneeling obediently before her. She warned them both to tell the truth, since they had tried to rob her precious Clicia. But the man replied that it wasn't like that at all. They didn't even know who Clicia was. They were just petty thieves trying to steal some money. Clicia didn't believe these pathetic thieves had just happened to pick her room. But that was the truth, as the gang just wanted to make a quick buck off a young, inexperienced traveler. Usually, the locally infamous brothers would put a sleeping drug in their visitors' food. Clicia knew that stuff was expensive, but the brothers replied that they used forest mushroom powder. The gang was stunned when the heroine revealed that the stuff didn't work on her. Clicia's father had been in Night Squad, and Clicia called everyone in it aunt and uncle. One of them was a young warrior known as Aunt Lance, famous for being a medical genius. She played a huge role in battles with her medicines. The problem was, she was very fond of Clicia. Lance's ultra-precise control over dosages had given Clicia an extremely strong immunity to poison, so basically, almost no poison worked on her. Clicia decided to hand the robbers over to the city guard. The brothers began to beg her for mercy this time. They promised never to steal again, saying they only did it out of hunger and desperation. Nothing more. Their mother was very sick, so they were trying to raise money for her medicine. Just then, the manager knocked on the door, asking if the guest was all right. The brothers were terrified, and Clicia cursed under her breath. She pointed to the window and told the two to take the money and get out of her room. Then she threw a few gold coins on the floor. Clicia told the two thieves to see this as a chance to turn over a new leaf and live a good life. She ordered the brothers to be sure to use that money to buy medicine for their sick mother. The moonlight illuminated the heroine's face, and the two men froze, staring at her and asking if she was the Crimson Witch. This enraged Clicia, and the two immediately started apologizing, saying they had just misspoken and hurried to pick up the gold coins. The brothers quickly left the heroine's room, not understanding how she could have believed their sob story about their parents. Nevertheless, a thought crossed their minds that maybe they should go straight. The manager, holding a frying pan, peeked into Clicia's room, and she reassured him, explaining that she was just trying to swat a bug. The heroine had no memory of her mother, so that might be why she got so emotional. She spun around and suddenly asked if he was in on it too. The spy under the window froze, then he took off running. Tom received the report. The young lad's name was Sasha Lin, and he had paid with gold coins from the central bank. When the kid arrived, he was covered in dust and dirt from head to toe, but he walked straight up to the clerk and asked for a room and some food. He ate as if he hadn't seen food in days, but still with some manners. Tom thought he might be some young noble from the south. The hybrid horse in the stable looked exhausted. You'd have to ride it nonstop for at least 3 days to get it that tired. Just then, there was a knock on the Lord's door. The spy slipped in and reported that he had successfully completed his surveillance as ordered. Besides him, the so-called Night Brothers were also at the designated location. The spy got closer, ready to jump in and help the kid if needed, but he handled it himself, no problem. And guess what? He's immune to poison. The guest immediately backed away as soon as he caught his scent. It's still not certain what kind of rune he uses, but we're likely dealing with a rune user. Tom asked Luke if there was any news from the Zen Council of Elders, and the secretary said no. They sent some financial reports from Zena, nothing out of the ordinary. Tom was beginning to seriously suspect this guy was one of His Majesty's agents. So, the black-haired man had Luke arrange a meeting, but it had to look completely natural. 20 years ago, the continent of Ashi was consumed by the flames of imperial ambition. The royal family, possessing the power to shatter minds, ravaged nations, leaving only ruins in their wake. Just as the entire continent was on the verge of collapse, the Furza Empire, led by the Knight Iser, successfully reclaimed the vast southern lands. This earned him the title of the Crimson Lion. It marked the beginning of an even more brutal war between the two empires. Afterwards, after 9 painful years of war, the tables turned in an instant, all thanks to one person who personally dealt with the Servon royal family members. This master of military and strategy unified 70% of the continent under his banner and ended the war. He was the 16-year-old crown prince of the Fursa Empire, known as Ian Fursa, and he became the youngest emperor in history. In his 9 years of rule, he successfully stabilized the entire geopolitical situation. But now, the fourth emperor had just discovered that he was, apparently, married. They told him the temple had messed up and the registration had actually happened 3 years ago. So according to official documents, the great emperor was married. Ian waved his hand, telling them to take care of it quietly and make this whole mess disappear. But that wouldn't work because marriage procedures were controlled by the temple, and the Imperial Palace could not interfere. The room fell silent. The Imperial advisor was terrified when His Majesty reached for the documents. The great Emperor Ian Furza, war hero and savior of the continent, was about to reveal his true colors without an audience. That of a cold-hearted lunatic with the personality of a mad dog, a scoundrel, and a sadist. The Emperor flew into a rage and ordered Count Murray to arrange a meeting with the High Priest as soon as possible. The Imperial advisor promised to get it done quickly. The Count prayed deep down to all the gods he knew, hoping the temple could solve this problem. But the High Priest rejected him outright. He said it was impossible. Birth certificates, engagement records, all these royal matters were handled by the temple. It was an ironclad rule designed to prevent any illicit dealings within the Imperial Palace. So not even the emperor could just go in and change things. But this wasn't a simple matter of editing. It was a mistake made by the temple that needed to be corrected immediately. The high priest explained that documents could be edited within a year, but after that, they were blessed and sealed tight. Ian wondered if having all involved parties testify would affect the document's legality. But how could the emperor prove that his legal wife wasn't being pressured by an emperor who had suddenly changed his mind? The blonde man snapped at the priest in a cold voice, asking if he understood what he was accusing him of. The air was thick with tension, and the high priest was instantly frozen solid. Count Murray froze in fear, begging His Majesty to retract the rune, reminding him they were still in the sacred temple. The head of the temple calmly explained to the emperor that the law should be stricter for him than for anyone else. Therefore, the high priest declared His Majesty's marriage would not be annulled. Ian slammed his fist into the wall, driven by pure rage. A thought crossed his mind. He could burn this damn temple to the ground, and his people would just get used to a new religion. It was time for the Imperial advisor to explain how this whole mess started in the first place. It all began a few years ago when His Majesty was swamped with a mountain of documents. But instead of handling it himself, the Emperor ordered Count Murray to sort everything out. The advisor explained that he couldn't sign them himself. Some documents require the Emperor's personal review. Rebels were still plotting assassinations, hoping to get rid of Ian once and for all. The Emperor simply told his advisor to hold all the documents. Don't send them out. Count Murray tried to explain that there might be very important things in those documents, but the Emperor repeated, send nothing. That was basically how the whole mess started. The Emperor shoved the advisor violently against the wall, roaring that he should have prevented any potential problems from happening. Just then, someone entered the room, saving Count Murray from serious injury. The Emperor's younger brother, Ryan Furza, said they could surely find a solution. A divorce might be the way to resolve this whole thing. It was the only way out for now. Listen, the records will still exist, but no one will look at them, so it's not a bad option. The Emperor wanted to know who this woman was, so the advisor briefed him. She was the eldest daughter of Viscount Majorino. Ian thought to himself, is this really Sir Isaac's daughter? As far as Count Murray knew, he was a knight who had risen from the bottom and received his Viscount title for his contributions to the Empire. The Emperor waved his hand and said to forget about the divorce. The lady had just come of age, and she would have to bear the stigma of being a divorcee and be exiled for 10 years. The Imperial advisor couldn't believe the Emperor was actually worried about someone other than himself. Count Murray explained that Miss Clicia would actually benefit from the divorce, as she would receive all the privileges of a former Empress. But the bottom line was these guys were toying with the young lady's future. So Ryan suggested they hold a national day of mourning. Not only the advisors, but even the cold-hearted Emperor himself was stunned by his brother's proposal. If that option didn't work, Ryan suggested his brother just marry the girl. The Emperor was furious, and Count Murray was so scared. He begged Sir Ryan to stop, but it was too late, as Ian suggested his brother step outside for a moment. In the Furza Empire, there were two main types of magic. First was magic summoned using minerals, so-called mana stones, which was based on complex rituals and calculations. Second was rune magic, which relied on natural forces and was cast by accumulating these forces within the mage's body. In this world, magic was widely used for daily needs, and thanks to mana stones, it was readily available. However, rune magic required specific physiological traits and could not be used by everyone. In other words, one had to have a natural gift. In the Furza Empire, there were people with superior combat and magic skills known as rune knights. The Wind Rune, also known as the Power of Flow, was the most effective in combat. That's why most rune knights, including Sir Ryan, chose the Wind Rune. On the other hand, the Ice Rune, also known as the Power of Frost, was considered much less effective in battle. But the Emperor couldn't care less. Ryan froze in fear as a bolt of lightning struck beside him. He was shocked that his brother could channel such immense power from an ordinary training sword, so he decided to put some distance between them as quickly as possible. But the blonde lad didn't notice that his feet were already frozen to the ground. Ian grinned and swung his sword, leaving Ryan no choice but to admit defeat. Even so, the Emperor still hit him. Ian had mastery over all 5 elemental runes, a major reason why he became the absolute ruler of the 5 dynasties. The Emperor realized he hadn't been strict enough in teaching his brother. He should have spent more time mentoring Ryan. Ian told his little brother he should be glad he went easy on him. But now, Sir Ryan Furza must go to the Majorino estate and deliver the news of the divorce in person. It was a 2-week journey to Shumarin, but the Emperor sent the captain of the palace guard there anyway. So 2 weeks later, Ryan arrived at the Majorino estate and informed the Viscount's family of all the details. The young lady was furious, but the blonde man was just glad he had completed his mission. His brother had been too soft on Isaac Majorino. When that once nameless nobody had the gall to refuse the Emperor's offer to command an army, Ian gave him a title and land. Ryan had thought he would have to use that to pressure them, but now it seemed unnecessary. It was just a remote estate with a retired old knight and his ill-mannered daughter. That's why the blonde man was sure he had nothing to worry about. Sir Ryan Furza was the ruler's only brother, who had deliberately given up the noble life to become the Emperor's sword. But he didn't know yet that the ill-mannered girl from the remotest state was capable of causing such a stir in the Empire. Rewinding time a bit, a subordinate asked Secretary Luke how they should handle the young man named Sasha Lin. They needed to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible, right? The boss had ordered them to arrange everything to be as natural as possible. An interesting idea crossed Luke's mind, and he decided to ask about the hybrid horse. The stable hand said the guest was leaving tomorrow and had only requested water for the horse, even though hybrid horses eat meat. And that was exactly what Luke decided to exploit. Now back to the present. Clicia was completely confused about what was happening. Shukran had made a mess of stall. A crowd of onlookers was shocked to see an ordinary-looking horse causing such chaos and now eating meat. The beast froze when its lady approached from behind and coldly called its name. Clicia, suppressing her rising anger, demanded it explain what happened. Shukran panicked and explained to his mistress that it was all a misunderstanding. He was just suddenly overcome by a terrible hunger. The heroine started snatching the meat from its mouth, saying, "Are you looking for a death wish?" The beast yanked the meat back, begging to at least enjoy this last delicious bite. The problem was they both overestimated their strength. The meat went flying and then comically landed right on some guy's face. It turned out to be Hans, the owner of Tom's butcher shop. He fell to his knees, realizing his career was over. Now, Secretary Luke could proceed with the next step. He cleared his throat and asked the kid if the horse that caused all this chaos was his. Clicia forced a nervous smile, knowing she was in big trouble now. They took her to an office, and she kept apologizing the whole way. Her horse didn't usually cause this kind of trouble, but it had somehow lost control this time. The whole thing was a complete surprise to her, especially since Clicia had planned to leave Muda first thing in the morning. As the boss expected, this was no ordinary tourist. Anyone else would have been on their knees begging for forgiveness by now. The appetite-enhancing water was even more effective than Secretary Luke had imagined. Clicia thought to herself that the guy was probably going to demand compensation, since the stall likely belonged to him. Luke explained that they were now at the headquarters of Tom Holdings, and the stall was run by their people. The heroine had heard of this company, so things would go much more smoothly than she had imagined. Although Clicia was secretly furious at Shukran for causing trouble at a big shot shop. On the other hand, Luke was surprised that the lad could remain so calm after hearing Tom's name. Since the damages were quite severe, he wasn't authorized to handle the matter, so he quickly excused himself. Clicia wondered how much money the owner would extort from her. She froze when a man walked into the room and said hello. Tom heard the kid's horse had caused a bit of a commotion on his turf. The heroine's jaw nearly hit the floor. The guy had black hair, red eyes, and wore an extremely well-fitted ink-black suit. Tom was stunned when the guest asked if he was the Duke of the North. The black-haired man had no idea how she knew. Although Tom came from humble beginnings, he now possessed more wealth than many flamboyant nobles. But that wasn't his real identity. The hero's real name was Eugene Wiener de Servan. He was the last of the royal bloodline and the leader of the rebels trying to revive the empire. He was once a duke who ruled over the vast territories of the north. The kid in front of him looked more like a girl, which probably meant she was trying to hide everything, even her gender. From the way she held her cup, she definitely came from a noble family. But more importantly, she knew Eugene's true background. So our hero demanded she clarify what she meant by Duke of the North. Now, depending on her answer, Eugene would decide whether to kill this impudent girl on the spot. As Tom stared at her with a smile, Clicia had no idea her life hung on her answer. The girl said it was a misunderstanding. Tom perfectly embodied the image of the Duke of the North, so it was an easy mix-up, which was why the unfortunate slip of the tongue occurred. Clicia had no intention of offending her generous host, but Tom stared at her intently, not believing a word. He saw through her clumsy attempt to change the subject. Clicia asked how much money it would take to make this whole misunderstanding go away. Raikin finally tore his gaze away from the girl's face. He paused dramatically, gathering his thoughts and calculating his next move. He pulled out a small, exquisite abacus and proposed they calculate the damages. All right, let's calculate the repair costs, the destroyed goods, compensation for emotional distress, and damages for the neighboring merchants. The total comes to 50,000 gold coins. The guy couldn't resist a sarcastic comment, even offering a 10% discount. He was practically glowing with satisfaction seeing Clicia's jaw drop in astonishment. The girl forced a dry laugh, acting nonchalant as she prepared to pay her debt, but inwardly, she was terrified. The problem was, Muda was a trade hub near the capital, and prices were ridiculously high. However, there was another way, as her father had set up a trust fund in her name that she could access. She scoffed at the ridiculous idea, but the problem was that as soon as the money was withdrawn, her father would be notified and would come running to this town to deal with the mess his wayward daughter had caused. Meanwhile, Tom's smile faded a little. He hadn't expected his completely outrageous demand to be met. He was sure she was a rich young lady traveling incognito, but he couldn't figure out why she was playing dumb. Clicia put on a puzzled expression, saying she didn't have that much cash on her. The girl then said she needed to go to the Imperial bank to withdraw money from her account and would pay her debt afterward. The young man thought for a moment. There was no proper bank in Muda, so she would have to go to the capital, but she would have to leave her mixed-breed horse as collateral. The news hit Clicia like a lightning bolt. She had no idea how the information had leaked. Then it dawned on her. It was Shocklin who had crashed through several buildings, burst into a butcher shop, and started devouring meat in front of everyone. Now, filled with regret, she struggled to keep her composure. She agreed to leave the horse, but how was she supposed to get to the capital? Then, Tom grinned like a Cheshire cat, replying that he happened to have some business in the capital and proposed they go together. After Clicia left, the secretary asked his master if he was really going to the capital. Was it really worth the risk to be with this strange girl? Even if there hadn't been any news from the Emperor lately, this could be a trap. The young man paused, then countered with a question. What's the best way to find out about someone? He answered his own question. It's simple, talk to them more, and eventually they'll spill their guts. If you talk long enough, their cards will be on the table, and the journey to the capital tomorrow would take a full day. During the long journey, the young man would uncover all the secrets of this strange girl. The two young people sat on a comfortable sofa, gazing at the passing scenery outside the window and sharing their thoughts. But the dark-haired girl was playing the innocent victim, while Clicia felt extremely awkward due to her guilty conscience. To lighten the mood, the girl decided to compliment the young man. Clicia mustered her courage and declared that she was right. He looked exactly like the Duke of the North. Tom became wary, wondering if the girl was testing him or hinting at something. So, the young man remained silent, merely frowning and staring intently at Clicia's face. Seeing the girl was a bit flustered, she continued, asking if the gentleman knew of the great Duke of the North, to which Tom said no. The girl feigned enthusiasm, saying that since her companion didn't know, she would tell him about the Duke of the North. They had a whole day, and they shouldn't miss such a good opportunity to learn something new. The girl, completely relaxed, chattered on, while the guy was about to be driven mad by her endless stories. Clicia had found someone to talk to and simply couldn't stop. At that moment, she threw another difficult question at him. The young man frowned. He didn't like the meaningful implication behind the question. Almost all the questions revolved around how to deal with those who deserved it, if you know what I mean. Tom finally couldn't take it anymore and snapped. Does someone really have to get hurt? Can't any problem be solved without that? The next question made him freeze. The girl asked him which was more important to him, the life of the woman he loved or his loyalty to the royal family. He shouted that for him, loyalty to the emperor was the most important thing, bar none. But Clicia got angry hearing this. She pointed at him and retorted that Tom was nothing like the Duke of the North. Listening to her ramble on about why he couldn't possibly be the nobleman, Tom breathed a sigh of relief. The girl continued, saying the Duke had to be strong, mysterious, and possessed many other amazing qualities. She went on, finally ending her long speech by shouting about how good the Duke of the North was in bed. She was practically about to pounce on the poor guy. Tom tried to change the subject, but Clicia wasn't buying it. She wouldn't let him off the hook, forcing him to keep listening. He couldn't possibly find a better expert on the subject than her, so she was prepared to recite every romance novel she had ever read. The guy felt like he was on the verge of a mental breakdown. The next morning, the carriage arrived at the Imperial capital, Sigret. Clicia stared out the window in awe at the towering buildings, feeling like an insignificant little bug. She had read many descriptions of the capital's splendor, but never imagined it would be so breathtaking. Spotting a good place, she asked the man to let her out right there so she could go to the bank. The coachman stopped the carriage in the middle of the busy street. Tom was thrilled to finally be rid of the talkative passenger when an idea suddenly struck him. He extended his hand and said he was always happy to help a charming lady like her. Realizing her disguise had been seen through, the girl froze. She couldn't take her eyes off the handsome guy, as if seeing him for the first time. Stepping out of the carriage, Clicia announced that despite his best efforts, he had failed the gentleman test. Her companion couldn't call himself the Duke of the North. He needed to work on his manners. Only then would she consider letting him kidnap her. Then, the girl began to say her goodbyes as if it were the end of the world. Just then, his secretary, who had been riding in another carriage, approached, and they silently watched Clicia leave together. The secretary noted how dramatically the strange girl had said goodbye to his master, calling him Duke. The secretary was going crazy, even suggesting sending a spy to follow the girl. But Tom refused, thinking it was better to let things be and that there was nothing to worry about. Ever since Eugene Rakin's homeland was destroyed, he had been bent on revenge against the Fossa Empire. And now, the last member of this ancient family seemed to have fallen in love, which was why he didn't want anything to happen to Clicia. The young man climbed into the carriage and leaned back against the soft cushions with a sigh of relief. He had felt on the verge of insanity for the entire journey. The number of romance novels the girl had read was terrifying. She chattered day and night, pouring out all her knowledge about the Duke of the North. This eccentric girl, a complete fangirl of the Duke of the North, was utterly obsessed with him. Finding himself still thinking about her, Tom slapped his forehead hard. He had to stop these foolish thoughts, or he'd start believing she was a witch who had cast some kind of spell on him. The thought made Eugene freeze. Stepping out of the carriage, Clicia stretched. She enjoyed the feeling. Strangely, she didn't even notice a guy calling out to her. But it didn't matter. She wasn't here for romance. She arrived at the temple, and seeing no one answer the door, she announced loudly, "Clicia Megliarino requests an audience with the high priest." However, only silence answered her. At a loss, the girl began to pound on the huge doors with all her might, shouting to get the priest's attention. Finally, the lock clicked, a small door opened, and a young priest peeked out. Clicia straightened her hat and declared that she was no beggar and was here for a completely different reason. She stood up straight, stated her name, and again requested an audience with the high priest on a very important matter. He looked her up and down, and without a word, simply pointed toward the exit. Knowing she wouldn't get anywhere, Clicia left with heavy steps. She didn't see the high priest peek out from behind the door and whisper to the boy, asking if their little trick had worked. The young priest said everything went smoothly this time, but wasn't sure if he could refuse her if she came again. The boy couldn't help but ask the high priest why he didn't want to see her, and the man just smiled. Meanwhile, Clicia was running down the street when she suddenly felt hunger pang in her stomach. The feeling was so intense that she stopped, deciding to get something to eat after she was done with the bank. Clicia walked absent-mindedly to the ornate gates, only to find to her shock that the bank was closed and wouldn't open for another 2 days. She hadn't expected this at all. Seriously, what kind of idiot would design a bank that closes on weekends? But the worst part was, she was now penniless. Just then, she remembered the building in the central square that was giving out free food. She slowly walked over, only to find that they had already finished for the day, and she would have to come back tomorrow. Unbelievable. Even here, she was just 15 minutes late. The girl plopped down on the pavement, surrounded by beggars and vagrants, wondering what kind of mess her stupid decisions had gotten her into. Maybe she shouldn't have been so foolishly generous and given all her cash to those thugs. Clicia felt like a complete idiot. Now she was all alone in a huge, unfamiliar city, penniless, and without even her trusty Shocklin to protect her. Worst of all, she had to survive like this for 2 whole days with no money, no food, and no help. Well, what could she do? At least she still had her sword. But the girl couldn't find her trusty blade. This sent Clicia into a complete and utter panic. Tom was holding a package a passenger had left behind. Examining it, he was surprised to find himself holding a sword with a comfortable, well-worn hilt. And Clicia was fuming. For some reason, the girl was convinced that the smug, pretty boy who looked like the Duke of the North had stolen her sword. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, a real drama was unfolding. The Emperor's advisor was arguing with His Majesty, expressing his displeasure that the Emperor wanted to wander the city in plain clothes to see how his people live. Advisor Murray explained that not only was it dangerous, but it would cause complete chaos if people recognized the emperor. Even changing in his simple clothes wouldn't help. The emperor's appearance was too recognizable. Not many people had such bright golden hair and striking eyes. That's why Murray was completely against sneaking out and insisted that Your Majesty should tour the town with an escort. But once the emperor got an idea in his head, he was incredibly stubborn and would do whatever it took to get his way. Realizing he couldn't talk his boss out of it, Murray could only close his eyes in resignation and say no more. Just as he was accepting the inevitable, Clarencia Logan, one of the commanders of the palace guard, chimed in. She understood His Majesty's predicament and offered him some special pills that could solve the problem. They had a unique property that could change your hair color for about a day, but you couldn't use any magic or the effect would wear off. The emperor eagerly swallowed a pill and was amazed to see his hair turn light brown in the mirror. Now he could walk around the city freely without fear of being recognized. Not wanting to wait any longer, His Majesty nimbly hopped onto the windowsill, grinned at his advisor, and jumped. A maid who saw the crazy move gasped, terrified that the emperor would be injured from such a high jump. But advisor Murray and Clarencia were calm. A mage with that kind of power would be fine. Murray wondered where the magic pills came from, and Clarencia said they were her own personal invention. It had been a full 10 years since the war ended, and looking at the Imperial capital, you couldn't even tell. Walking the streets, the emperor admired the prosperity and development of Fossa. But the poverty problem was still a mess. The emperor wondered bitterly, were there really so many starving people in the city that they still couldn't solve the problem? Remembering how much effort he'd put into fighting corruption, the emperor groaned in frustration. As a result, he didn't immediately hear someone calling him and only noticed when the stranger tapped him on the shoulder. The emperor turned around quickly. Standing beside him was a young person in a hat and simple traveling clothes. It was Clicia. She just wanted to tell us that the building is closed today, so there's no free food, but they're open on weekends, so if you can wait until tomorrow, you can get a decent meal. The emperor chuckled at this. His experienced eyes were not fooled by the clumsy disguise. He could immediately tell it was a woman dressed as a man. But more importantly, he could sense that this stranger possessed a flame rune. So now, the bearer of this extremely rare talent was standing before him dressed like a beggar. The emperor had to find out what was going on. Without hesitation, he asked Clicia if she would be willing to work for him, which took her by surprise. Only then did she realize that this guy wasn't some street urchin, but a very handsome and charming young man. But the strangest thing was, she had a nagging feeling that she had seen him before, that he was very familiar. More importantly, Clicia felt a real attraction to this guy. She reminded herself that her ideal type was a dark-haired duke with deadly red eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. That's the setup for a side character. Don't just fall for anyone. Seeing the girl's hesitation, the emperor said he wouldn't ask for anything unreasonable and could treat her to a good meal. This dispelled all of Clicia's doubts. She gave a silly bow and said that as long as there was meat on the menu, she would gladly accept the job and be a model employee. The two shook hands. The emperor introduced himself as Ray Vogue, a private investigator, while Clicia, getting into character, called herself Sasha Lynn. The emperor pointed to a man on the pavement carrying a large briefcase. We think he's cheating on his wife, so Clicia needs to follow him and get proof of his misdeeds. The girl took off after the stranger, ready to expose the scoundrel's true colors. She followed him to an old building and hid around a corner to watch. Clicia hissed at him to keep his voice down, or they would surely give themselves away. The emperor had been keeping an eye on his new acquaintance and was surprised to find that he actually liked the girl. Just then, the man suddenly stopped, clutched his briefcase, and began to look around very nervously. It was obvious he'd noticed someone was following him. Without a moment's hesitation, the girl shouted at the top of her lungs, demanding that the despicable cheater stop right there, and then gave chase. The man panicked and took off running, but the street was a dead end, forcing him to stop. But it wasn't over. The stranger was enveloped in a green light, and with a wild leap, jumped over the wall. The emperor couldn't believe his eyes. Caught off guard, the young man stumbled, barely keeping his balance, but Clicia managed to reach out and grab him by the waist. Then the girl swept him into her arms and made an astonishing leap. She launched herself off the pavement, soaring high into the air, still holding the young man tightly, and pursued the stranger over the wall. All these acrobatic tumbles ended with a perfect landing. It wasn't until after they landed that the emperor realized what had happened, and he felt a sensation bordering on fear. The young man didn't know what to say, stammering his thanks and complimenting his unexpected employee. The Emperor's attention shifted to the fleeing stranger. All signs pointed to him being an important figure. Seeing his pursuers, the man dashed through an open door. They couldn't let him get away. Clicia screamed that she understood. He was here to meet his mistress and do unspeakable things with her. Nailed to the door was a sign with "For Sevens" painted on it, and then it dawned on the Emperor. For Bronze Sevens meant he was near the famous Lucky Box, the name of an underground auction that sold all sorts of contraband. It was a super secret club for those with a passion for forbidden things, where you could buy almost anything. The stranger with the briefcase burst into the auction hall, looking exhausted and as if he were hiding from someone. A well-dressed guy asked him what the rush was and if there was anything to worry about. The stranger grabbed his briefcase and slammed it on the table. He caught his breath, then laughed, saying it was the jackpot because he had obtained a way to overthrow the Emperor. At that moment, Clicia stood there confused. Her boss had told her to stop following him. The Emperor knew he might need a flame mage, but didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. He turned around and asked Clicia to forget what she had seen and go back to the square. The girl argued that if it was so dangerous, he definitely shouldn't go alone. Seriously, she'd rather go herself. A private investigator might not be prepared for whatever was in there. The Emperor just smiled at this and then burst out laughing, which completely confused Clicia. The guy ruffled her hair, promising they would meet again soon and that he would treat her to a grand lunch. With that, the Emperor sped off. Clicia was stunned by how quickly things were moving, but her employer's actions seemed a bit reckless. The underground auction was held in a huge, theater-like hall. A well-dressed host with a microphone walked onto the stage and cheerfully greeted the distinguished guests. Meanwhile, the Emperor found a spot in an aisle near the balcony, looking down on the scene from above. The host announced the first lots of the evening, a mixed-breed horse named Windchaser and a slave from a mysterious desert land. Finally, they announced a mysterious item called the Fall of the Empire, which turned out to be a sealed envelope. The Emperor was thunderstruck. He could feel the importance emanating from the envelope. Still, things were going rather well, considering he had managed to infiltrate the inner circle of this shady organization. Night had completely fallen by the time Clicia was walking down the street. She had just been sure she'd get a decent dinner tonight, and then, poof, the dream was shattered. Recent events flashed through her mind, and she wondered, was that guy a total pushover, or have I gotten stronger? Actually, her new acquaintance was surprisingly interesting, even if he couldn't use magic runes. Suddenly, she jumped. What if he needs help right now? He's no match for those thugs. She continued walking for a moment, but then abruptly turned and ran back the way she came. Meanwhile, the Emperor was watching the auction proceed. The auctioneer announced that the unique horse had been sold for 500,000 gold coins. These guys reeked of the underworld. The smart move would be to call on the palace guard, not play the hero alone. The Emperor had just noticed his new acquaintance, the girl disguised as a young man, right next to him. The young man turned to her and asked sternly what she was doing here. Clicia grinned smugly, playing the confident guy, and said she had bribed the guards and handled things her way. The girl leaned over the railing, looking in amazement at the well-dressed crowd below. The auction on stage continued, with the host introducing the next item, a slave named Santir from a mysterious land. Clicia was shocked to hear the young man's starting price was a whopping 100,000 gold coins. The Emperor decided they needed to get out of there and try to pull the stubborn girl away. Looking at the stage, Clicia was furious. Did the warriors of the Empire fight and bleed for this kind of filthy business? A moment later, she climbed onto the railing. Ready to jump, Clicia turned to look at her companion, pleading with him to back her up and arrest all this scum. The Emperor, stunned by her naivety, shook his head and told her to calm down and think twice. But Clicia was unstoppable. She pushed off with all her might, leaping forward and landing gracefully on the stage. Clicia stood up straight and screamed, calling everyone present disgusting slave traders. Seeing the guards rush to help, the host grew bold and began apologizing to the guests, promising to quell the misunderstanding. Clicia rushed to the young man kneeling on the floor, untied his hands, and promised to save him if he just listened to her. However, judging by his reaction, the young man did not want to be saved. He snarled at the girl, demanding she mind her own business. Clicia ignored the boy, freed him, and then knocked him on the back of the head. Then she swept him into her arms and headed for the exit. The Emperor was in complete shock at what his new acquaintance had done. Seeing the guards rushing toward her, Clicia turned to face them, unafraid of a fight. The arrogant men hadn't expected any resistance, let alone a flame mage in their midst. A second later, a raging fire broke out in the abandoned buildings on the outskirts of the city, threatening to destroy everything. Climbing to the top of a high tower, Clicia realized she might have gone a little overboard. Her skills were clearly rusty. Suddenly, she felt the boy she had rescued, the one she was carrying on her shoulder, begin to squirm frantically. He immediately demanded to be put down. She gently placed the boy on the ground, and his face immediately twisted into an expression of anger and extreme annoyance. The little brat yelled at his heroes, demanding to know how they dared to interfere in his important business, and saying he would never forgive them. Clicia gently stroked the boy's head, and he immediately quieted down, soothed by her touch. With a tolerant and sincere smile, she explained to the boy that in this situation, he should say thank you, instead of blaming others to "Oh, it's a mirror, huh?" the blond man said suddenly, catching Clicia off guard and making the boy freeze. A sly and satisfied smile crept across the Emperor's face. He understood now. This boy's people had been watching them for some time. There was no longer any need to hide. Clicia's jaw dropped as mysterious figures in dark cloaks suddenly appeared on the tower. They took the boy, and he went with them without even putting up a fight. She had no idea who they were, but the detective let them go. The cloak man gave a quick nod without a word. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the mysterious figures vanished. Clicia asked in confusion who those people were, who the boy was, and what on earth mirror meant. The Emperor patiently explained that mirror was another kind of magic, somewhat like runes, but with some differences. The Emperor decided he needed to deal with this new problem. There was no time to lose. He told the woman to hide for a while. The people from the auction house would likely be after her. Clicia wanted to tell the detective she'd be fine, but he was already gone. The guy sped off without even saying goodbye. But Clicia wasn't too worried. The skinny detective seemed able to take care of himself. Suddenly, the clever young woman remembered something very important. The guy had promised to buy her dinner and then abandon her without even feeding her. The subordinates knelt before Lord Sisa, telling him it had been too risky. His Holiness's actions were too dangerous. If the Sultan found out, he would be furious. But everything would have gone according to plan if those two idiots hadn't shown up. The servants told their master that the guy with the light brown hair was actually the Emperor of the Fossa Empire. They hadn't figured out how or why the Emperor was hiding his identity, but his energy gave him away completely. It was one of a kind. That's why Lord Sisa had found his aura familiar. Now that even the Emperor knew the situation, we must return at once. Suddenly, the hero realized something extremely important. Recalling those moments, he had been so distracted by other things that he hadn't even noticed a crucial point: how the terrible, soul-tearing pain had suddenly and completely subsided. Unfortunately, his subordinates couldn't find out who the second person was. They only discovered it was a woman. Then, Lord Sisa slowly reached for the gleaming pendant, hanging around his neck. At this moment, he felt that the thing seemed to have completely stabilized. His most loyal men respectfully told His Holiness that they must leave at once. The hero nodded quickly and immediately infused a powerful ancient amulet with energy. With a bang, he magically transformed into an adult man, wondering when he would see the girl named Sasha again. A deafening thunderclap tore through the sky, and a flash of lightning illuminated the Emperor's tense and sinister, smiling face. In a cloyingly sweet tone, he asked a bunch of useless idiots what they did all day if they couldn't even sniff out a single auction. The impatient madman couldn't even wait for dawn and dragged all the officials out of their beds in the middle of the night. Ian didn't want to hear any excuses. He told the officials to take care of the city, but they had made a mess of it. A terrified lackey blurted out that things were not at all as they seemed. Sir Ryan, however, very smoothly told them that water that is too clear has no fish, just like being completely sterile. He declared that as long as the officials kept a close eye on the underworld, no major problems would arise. So it was unanimously decided to let them be. Let run its course. The Emperor, suppressing his anger, demanded to know where Ryan was. As the valiant captain of the guard, he was probably already on site handling things. Ryan was somewhat surprised by the chaotic scene before him. A knight reported to the captain that they had cleared almost all the debris and that, fortunately, no civilians were injured. Suddenly, on the dark, damp ground, the blond man clearly spotted a strange, sealed envelope. The knight explicitly reported that they had arrested all the main suspects related to the item destined to destroy the Empire. The item was not sold. After listening carefully to the report, Ryan cautiously opened the envelope. A mysterious smile appeared on his face, and he then told the knights that all was well and they could forget about the main target. He had cleverly spread carefully fabricated rumors everywhere. Anyone with connections and money had surely heard them. The ancient servant empire was destroyed long ago, but their cunning descendants were not completely eradicated and are now scattered throughout Fursa. After 10 long years of being completely forgotten, they were finally ready to carry out their evil and terrible plan for revenge. Ryan completely burned the mysterious envelope along with the secret documents inside. He was suddenly very curious what kind of expression his brother would have when he finally figured everything out. At that very moment, in a secret office in the capital, Luke reported that Zena's people were making a major move. They planned to go directly after the Emperor himself. Eugene flew into a rage, demanding to know why his men hadn't confirmed with him first. According to the elders, they were dissatisfied with the boss's plan because the preparation was taking too long. It seemed they had a trump card up their sleeve and were now in a hurry to play it and take out the Emperor. Eugene cursed, telling Zena to go to hell. He had no intention of keeping idiots who would only get in the way. The Northern Duke unveiled a map secretly hidden behind the curtains and confidently declared his plan to be flawless. The nobles and subjects of the Servant Empire, those who survived the war with Fursa, formed a secret organization called Zena. Then they spread their roots across the entire continent, extending their claws everywhere, all in the name of one day restoring their empire to its former glory. Eugene could understand their impatience. After all, many years had passed since the war, but these people didn't realize that the only reason they had survived was because they hadn't personally faced Ian Furza. They simply couldn't imagine how terrifying that cold-hearted bastard was. Eugene sighed heavily and agreed to go see what his subordinate called their trump card. Luke was surprised that his master wanted to go in person. The Northern Duke gazed at his secretary and asked if they were leaving tomorrow night. The next morning, our heroine was starving. The supplies she had painstakingly scrounged up were gone in the blink of an eye. Just as Claudia had been told, even the vagrants' territories were all taken, and she couldn't just sleep wherever she wanted. She hadn't expected the capital to be such a dog-eat-dog place. It was all the fault of those two bastards. First, that damn emperor with his marriage business, and now that despicable detective. Suddenly, someone gently poked Claudia's shoulder. The young woman turned her gaze in surprise to a child. The little one suddenly called Claudia little bro and asked if he was new here. She hesitantly nodded, and the kind child handed her a whole loaf of bread. A bright, happy smile bloomed on his face. Claudia took the food, looked at the child in confusion, and asked, "What about you?" The boy explained that he got the bread for free at the soup kitchen and could get more later. Claudia took a bite and changed her opinion of the capital, thinking it was a great place. After finishing her meal, she wondered why there were so many homeless people if it was such a wealthy city. The boy, surprised, asked his little brother, "Don't you know? Vagrants and the poor from all over flock here on purpose, because His Majesty the Emperor personally takes care of the capital's welfare, and it's easier to get help and support here." He was actually from Shumarin, from a small nearby village, but his parents abandoned him, and he barely managed to make it to the capital. The boy added excitedly that no one cared for the people like His Majesty the Emperor. These words caught the heroine off guard. So this child, just like our heroine, was from Shumarin, born in the same damn place. Only now did Claudia realize that many people in her hometown were also struggling, which depressed her. The boy replied happily that His Majesty would soon put an end to all poverty. Suddenly, someone threw a sandwich at the child. The heroine froze, and the child fell silent. The man asked his companion why he was throwing food around, and the bastard replied that he was just feeding a stray. The nobleman didn't understand where all these rats crawled out from, desperately looking for food among the crowd. What on earth is the Emperor thinking? He should have cleaned out all the rabble from this city long ago to make life better. The man fell silent and turned his gaze to the person sitting next to the child. The heroine glared daggers at the bastard. The rich kid mocked the poor boy, asking what he was staring at and why he was grinning as if he was about to pounce. He soon got what he deserved. The heroine beat him to a pulp. He didn't even know what hit him. Claudia was arrested, and even at the station, the bastard was still yelling about how she dared to touch the son of someone important. The heroine realized the rules in this city were strict. The moment she threw a punch, the guards appeared instantly. Honestly, Claudia could have easily gotten out of that situation just by using a fire rune and showing off her power. But the girl had a completely different plan. Instead of running, she simply collapsed to the ground, letting the knights arrest her without any resistance. This left the guards completely baffled, as they hadn't expected such a reaction from their new captive. Claudia couldn't take it anymore. She needed some decent food, as she was too hungry to even concentrate. The guard officer angrily asked the young prisoner, Claudia, who was disguised as a male, if she was even listening to him. The guy she had just beaten up was the younger son of some high-ranking official, and street brawling was strictly forbidden. The officer demanded the prisoner's details, name, age, where she was from, and her business in the capital. Claudia decided to play it cool and reveal her true situation. She revealed that she was actually the daughter of Viscount Mezzarino and was here to see the emperor. The guard didn't believe her and demanded to see some identification. She grinned and said she'd lost it in the scuffle and couldn't show it to the police. So, yes, she was promptly thrown in jail. The defendant was convicted of aggravated assault with signs of mental issues and sentenced to 3 months in prison. Claudia thought it was complete nonsense when her cellmate suddenly asked if this was her first time inside. The girl yelled that she was framed and completely innocent, no matter how it looked. Well, she did beat up some idiot, but he totally asked for it, right? He had it coming. Her cellmate patted her on the shoulder as if in understanding and said that all the prisoners say that. It was pitch black outside, but the sky was full of twinkling stars. The barred doors creaked open, and the prisoners began to file out of their cells. They donned dark cloaks and slipped out, preparing to carry out their plan to assassinate the emperor. Zena's silver assassins used a special powder to knock out the guards. The right amount of forest mushroom powder worked wonders, and these men had brought just the right dose. The moon was much brighter than usual tonight, so they hoped it wouldn't ruin their cover and expose the entire operation. But the man who had spoken to Claudia earlier thought it was the perfect night to take out the emperor. While the prisoners whispered among themselves, our heroine was lying on the cold floor of her cell. Everyone was convinced the girl had passed out too and couldn't hear a thing. But when it grew quiet and everyone had left, Claudia propped herself up on her elbows and looked around. She stretched energetically and muttered under her breath about why sleeping powder was so popular lately. Claudia had been waiting impatiently for these people to leave and clear her path to freedom. The girl figured it was best to play dead and not draw attention to herself around these shady characters. But after overhearing their plan to take out the emperor, she decided to find the officer on duty and snitch. So she quickly slipped out of her cell and headed for the exit. Once outside, Claudia began scanning her surroundings for any potential threats or guards. A look of confusion immediately crossed her face. Even though this was inside the Imperial Palace, why wasn't there a single guard on duty? Seriously, how could the knights be so irresponsible? They were supposed to be guarding the palace from threats. On the ground, the heroine found a small piece of cloth and picked it up curiously. Then she tied her hair up in a high ponytail, realizing she had to clean up someone else's mess and save the world again. When Ryan saw his brother, a happy smile spread across his face, and he called out to him. The Emperor, walking ahead, heard his younger brother's familiar voice and turned around. Ian immediately rushed toward the little rascal he'd been looking for all this time and prepared to punch him. Ryan somehow managed to stop his brother, telling him not to get so worked up over some minor disagreements, because there were things far more important and serious than their squabbles right now. So His Majesty needed to head to the garden at once. The captain of the guard explained to his brother that a little surprise was waiting for him there, something he had gone to great lengths to prepare. Ian felt his brother was up to something again, but Ryan just asked him to cut him some slack. This time, the captain of the knights assured the emperor he wouldn't be disappointed. Under the cover of night, the members of Zena moved swiftly through the Imperial city, trying not to attract any attention. Suddenly, one of them got a bad feeling and told the leader that something was wrong. This place was supposed to be crawling with guards, yet they had waltzed right in without seeing a single soul. The leader just said that they worked for Zena, and that should give them all the confidence they needed to complete their mission. The elders had surely ensured that nothing would interfere with their operation and that everything would go according to plan. Suddenly, the man froze, his eyes wide with shock. They had finally spotted their main target, so close they could almost reach out and touch him. The Emperor walked into the garden, still unaware of what surprise his brother had prepared for him. What was he supposed to be seeing? Everything seemed far too quiet. Suddenly, figures in dark cloaks swarmed the king from all sides. A smile touched the Emperor's lips as he murmured that Ryan was quite the guy, having figured out his sneaky plan in a heartbeat. That little rascal actually dared to use the Emperor as bait for his dirty schemes. A Zena member activated a crystal and threw it at His Majesty with the precision of an expert knife thrower. A magic circle instantly locked onto the Emperor's body, disabling him in seconds and leaving him helpless. Without a doubt, His Majesty Ian Furza had walked right into a trap. He was now enveloped in a magic suppressing device that had cost Zena a fortune and a great deal of effort. The magic of the Fursan people was indeed impressive, but because they relied entirely on runes, they could be easily suppressed with simple methods. In the end, the Emperor himself fell victim to such a simple trick orchestrated by the enemy. It seemed these lowlifes didn't get the picture. Rune Knights don't need an external mana source, making it a complete waste of time. Besides, they're easy to shatter with just a good hit. But the Zena men thought the Emperor was bluffing and swarmed him, ready to take him down on the spot. Ian just grinned at the mob and asked if they really thought this would be enough to defeat him. Like a ghost, unnoticed by anyone, Eugene slipped into the heavily guarded Imperial palace. Back then, Fursa had utterly defeated Servan, becoming the undisputed hegemon of the entire Ashy continent. The Zena organization inherited the mission of the fallen empire, their tentacles reaching into almost every corner. Bribery, black markets, gambling, anything to make a quick buck. They also secretly trained top-tier assassins. But after 10 years of fruitless waiting, their leaders began to turn into out-of-control, impatient old geezers. Even after all this time, Zena remained the main engine driven by the endless resentment from that old defeat. Eugene moved with extreme caution, slipping behind the thickest tree in the garden. In his mind, he mercilessly cursed all his high-ranking elders for being complete and utter idiots. The Emperor's own brother, Ryan Furza, was thought to be a lazy, good-for-nothing traitor who just got lucky with his family name. But these assumptions were dead wrong, as you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone more loyal to Ian Furza than his own brother. The mighty Emperor effortlessly attacked all the approaching criminals at once, demonstrating his power. Then he easily shattered the complex spell that was supposed to somehow suppress his incredible power. Once the criminals could no longer attack, His Majesty immediately stopped using his abilities on them. Ian was completely bewildered, wondering if this was all these nobodies had planned. Just then, his loyal knights rushed to his side. Clarencia told the Emperor that the entire palace guard had been suddenly summoned and ordered to stand by inside, right before the alarm went off. The blonde Emperor calmly announced that nothing serious had happened. It was just that his brother had decided to give him a rather unique gift. Instead of finishing anyone off, the Emperor simply ordered his guards to round up all the prisoners at once. Mary was utterly shocked that the magnificent garden was completely intact, without a single scratch. Ian said with a hint of nostalgia that his late mother had adored this beautiful place. Any other place would have been turned into a pile of rubble, but because the Emperor's mother cherished this garden, Ian had deliberately protected it. Even so, for even the most skilled and powerful master, controlling such immense raw energy with such precision was a deadly affair. It was a truly surgical feat, something only one person in the entire empire could pull off. After the dust had settled, the mighty Emperor turned to his loyal Clarencia. Calmly but firmly, with a suspiciously sweet but decidedly unfriendly smile, Ian told her to bring his brother Ryan before him yesterday. Without a moment's hesitation, she promised to carry out His Majesty's order immediately and without question. Mary wasted no time asking Clarencia where to find the captain of the Knights, but she had absolutely no idea. Ryan was probably playing hide-and-seek with the Emperor again, trying to avoid him. The more the captain of the Knights thought about the gift he had given, the more he gloated over his own cleverness. He had so easily flushed out all of Zena's little rats, practically serving them to his brother on a silver platter. But after all that had happened, his brother was probably fuming with rage right now. Suddenly, the blonde man turned to find a young girl with striking crimson hair making her way through the garden. He quickly caught up with the unexpected escapee and asked who on earth she was. He was quite surprised by the composure the young lady showed, not panicking at all. Ryan quickly pointed out an escape route for the girl, as well as the direction where she would surely be caught. Claudia anxiously asked what was happening in the palace, but the captain of the knights didn't give anything away. The girl calmly said that all she needed to know for now was that the emperor was safe and sound. Ryan didn't understand why this stranger was so interested. Claudia proudly declared that unwavering loyalty to His Majesty was the sacred duty of every citizen of this great empire. The words of this strange girl were filled with such sincere conviction that they deeply moved Ryan. Before he could even finish saying that the emperor was perfectly fine, she quickly thanked him and took off running. Except, young Claudia wasn't running to safety, but straight toward the damn palace. But Ryan figured nothing too bad could happen because of one random escapee, so he shouldn't worry. Still, this mysterious girl was certainly different. It's rare to meet someone who can actually use a fire rune. She didn't even flinch when she saw the captain of the knights, and her whole aura was a bit military-like, which was strange. But more importantly, they both had a lingering feeling that they had definitely met somewhere before. Suddenly, a wild thought struck him, and Ryan froze on the spot. But Claudia decided to ignore that strange thought for now, and continued running. Ryan whipped around, his eyes locked on the strange escapee disappearing in the distance. Looking closely now, he instantly recognized the young woman as Lady Claudia Mezzarino. His face was immediately filled with utter shock and complete confusion at the situation. The guy couldn't for the life of him figure out what this noble lady was doing in a place like this, all by herself. Claudia now had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet the emperor face-to-face and ask him some questions she'd been saving. She could finally see the face of her legal husband, even if just for once. But she didn't run into anyone as she ran, which was rather strange given the circumstances. Just as she was thinking that, Claudia suddenly heard voices in the distance. She tensed up, and then she finally saw His Majesty, the one she had been searching for and dreaming of. She practically skipped with glee toward her hubby. Hearing a noise behind him, Ian instinctively spun around. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent an ice shard flying toward Claudia. Mary was stunned by the Emperor's sudden move. Ian said it was probably just a rat, but the advisor was horrified, saying you can't just throw magic around like that. The floor is ruined, and now we have to fix it, so the advisor hoped His Majesty would try to restrain his use of runes sometimes. In reality, it was Eugene who had pushed the heroine out of the way just in time, saving her from certain death. Claudia froze, staring at the familiar face. The man was none other than Tom Raykin. Once the danger had passed, the man asked the lady what she was doing there. But what confused him most was the prison uniform on the young girl, number 3358. Claudia shot to her feet and snapped that she was the one who should be asking questions about what the hell was going on. What was Director Tom doing here, sneaking around in this chaotic mess? The fighting stance the girl struck made Eugene pause and think. At first, the guy just thought the heroine was odd, but now it was clear she was highly unusual. Though he probably should have guessed she was capable from the start, since not just anyone could get their hands on a crossbred horse. Claudia was taken aback when Tom suddenly asked how many points his work and efforts today had earned him. The man explained that the girl herself had said he needed to get 90 points to pass. Then, the hero pinned Claudia against the wall, a determined fire burning in his eyes. In that moment, the Northern Duke had to be strong, cold-blooded, mysterious, and gorgeous. It was his life's motto. The heroine just looked at the guy in confusion and told him he got 95 points. Suddenly, a loud laugh from out of nowhere startled them both. Ryan apologized for interrupting and explained that he was just in a hurry to catch up with them. But the talk about being strong and mysterious had him in stitches. By the time the captain of the knights had finished his spiel, the two of them had vanished without a trace. Ryan thought about it and figured that the girl number 3358, really was Lady Claudia. She had recognized the masked man, but it didn't seem like they knew each other well before. And the guy's appearance and demeanor reminded him of someone. 10 years ago, right after the war, a 16-year-old Ian had reported that Eugene had black hair and red eyes. The guy was a descendant of servant. He was turning 12 that year, which is a crazy coincidence because Ryan was also about to turn 12. He had sworn to Ian that he would find him himself, as it was just a matter of time and timing. Snapping out of his thoughts, the captain smiled, saying that kid had really grown up recently. Ryan froze in complete confusion when a familiar voice from behind him suddenly asked who he was talking about. The blonde man slowly turned and hesitantly greeted the person behind him, not expecting to see him. His older brother stepped forward, a suspiciously gentle smile on his face, but his entire being radiated a cold power. With that strange smile, Ian told Ryan to explain what the hell he was doing in his palace. The younger brother explained that they had been chasing Zena's men all over the Empire, but they always slipped away. But Ryan managed to convince them that he had betrayed the Empire and met with them personally to get the intel he needed. Then he set a trap for them to walk right into, feeding them false information about his weaknesses and vulnerabilities. While all their elite fighters were on that mission, Ryan infiltrated their headquarters and completely destroyed the place. Mary was stunned, unable to hide her surprise, when Clarencia suddenly took off, running for her life. The Emperor smiled and asked his brother if the mercenaries who appeared in the garden were his handiwork. As the Emperor's magic suddenly surged, growing stronger, the royal advisor chased after the valiant Clarencia. Claudia figured it would be hard to track them outside the castle. She turned to the director, but he said nothing. The heroine whispered in the man's ear that he had passed the Northern Duke's test with flying colors. Claudia took the director's hand firmly and said he could rest easy for now. If Tom were a bad guy, he probably wouldn't have saved the young woman in such a critical moment and stay by her side. So now he didn't have to worry about the consequences of his actions, or what would happen next. Eugene thought to himself that maybe he shouldn't have saved the girl in the first place, or should have finished her off the moment she became suspicious. It would have been much easier for him, but for some reason, he acted strangely around this woman and couldn't walk away. Claudia called out to the director, who for some reason wasn't listening to her, and repeated that she had left her sword with him. Eugene explained that he would keep it safe until she came to get it. But first, they needed to get her a better set of clothes. The man told Luke that it seemed the capital was quite lively today. Eugene's secretary confirmed this, adding that, as expected, Ryan's intelligence was fake and outdated. Eugene's main partner, Homer Rookin, turned around when Luke mentioned that Zena's headquarters had been taken down. The Rookin family was the financial backing that allowed Eugene to create the Toma Holding Company. Homer found it hard to believe that Zena would so easily let someone with those kinds of intentions get so close. The guy was a supporter of Zena, but his goal wasn't necessarily to revive the Servant Empire. Rookin supported the rebels for different reasons, with his own hidden agenda. Years ago, a young Eugene swore to revive Servant, become its ruler, and take revenge, especially to make the hero Jan full pay for all the pain and loss he had caused. He vowed to personally eliminate that vile serpent and avenge his family and people. Tears welled up in Eugene's eyes, and seeing this, the knight tried to comfort his grieving master. In his moment of grief, after hearing all this, Homer admitted that he was no genius in politics or war. He was just a merchant who knew how to manage money, and for a merchant, the most important thing was to see potential. From that day on, Homer decided that Eugene was the sole heir to their empire and prepared to invest in his future. But he wasn't investing in the empire itself, but in this ambitious young man. In other words, Homer Lakin wasn't betting on the revival of Servant, but on the potential of a young man named Eugene. Luke said that the boss went to investigate the situation himself to understand all the details. A servant entered the room and reported that the young master had returned, and he had brought a lady with him. Homer and Luke were completely stunned by this news. The secretary heard that the girl the boss brought back was wearing a prison uniform, which raised countless questions. Luke, shocked, asked if it was the girl with vibrant scarlet hair, and the servant confirmed it. Not only that, but the boss also ordered a bath and clean clothes to be prepared for her so she could freshen up. Homer shouted, "What in the world is going on?" Eugene had sworn not to be distracted by anything from his main goal. Luke tried to smooth things over, saying that the boss was at an age where he should be finding a partner, so it was no big deal, right? Even in such crazy times, Eugene deserved to experience some romance. There was dead silence in the room as everyone was caught off guard, trying to figure out what was happening. Homer immediately realized he had misjudged the situation. Eugene just sighed and held his forehead, already imagining the look on his main partner's face when he told him the news. So yes, he had to bring this strange girl back in the end. Eugene couldn't just leave Clicia alone on the streets to face who knows what, especially after everything she had been through. That's why he ordered them to let her clean up and change into new clothes, so she could at least feel a little more comfortable. That was all there was to it. There was no personal or intimate relationship between them. Once Eugene returned her sword, he could sever this strange connection between them without a doubt. Looking at the sword, the young man realized that the weapon looked quite old and had a sense of age, but it had been well maintained over the years. All signs indicated that this sword was extraordinary and could even be modified. This weapon was a real treasure. Eugene couldn't believe she would forget it, but just then, she knocked on the door and he let her in. He decided to stop thinking about it. After all, the weapon wasn't his. The moment he heard the door open, he prepared to welcome Clicia back. But he froze before he could finish his sentence, at a loss for words. The heroine smiled and declared that a hot bath was mankind's greatest invention. Clicia walked into the room in a light blue dress, thanking the Director General for his concern and care. Eugene was stunned. He couldn't understand how she had changed so much in such a short time. He slapped himself hard across the face to snap out of it and return to reality. Then he handed Clicia the sword she had left behind, which she happily accepted, thanking him. Now that the item was returned to its owner, our heroine could have gone home, but it was already late and deep into the night. So Eugene decided to let Clicia stay the night in a guest room, and she thanked him for his kindness and consideration. Suddenly, Clicia remembered something and decided to bring it up immediately. She asked the Director General if he could spare some time for her tomorrow. The next day, Clicia taught a harsh lesson to the scoundrels who had stolen her belongings and caused her so much trouble. The heroine finally got her identification card back and felt much more confident. All that was left was to go to the bank to withdraw money, and then she could pay off the debt and be free. It was only then that Eugene remembered about the payment. This whole debt incident was just a pretext to find out the young lady's identity, but refusing the money now would seem suspicious. All Eugene had to do now was accept the money and forget about this misunderstanding. But Eugene didn't know that the bank, which he thought would be the end of all the chaos, was about to reveal a shocking truth about Clicia. Clicia tried to explain that there must be a mistake with her documents, but the clerk assured her that was not the case. There was no one named Clicia Majorino on their client list. The heroine showed her identification card, proving that she was indeed Clicia Majorino. The bank clerk explained that she had checked several times, and under the Mezzarino family name, there was only Isaac Mezzarino. She asked the girl to wait a moment so she could check other families. As Clicia was not on the list, Eugene grew increasingly suspicious. Meanwhile, the bank clerk was carefully studying the lists. After finding the information she needed, the woman adjusted her glasses, which glinted in the sunlight. She asked the girl to confirm if her name was Clicia Majorino de Ferlza. The bank's customers and even the staff stared in astonishment at the girl who shared the same surname as the royal family. Eugene thought this was insane. Theoretically, it would only be possible if Clicia were the Empress. The heroine shuddered, realizing her situation. The man stared at her in complete shock. He didn't understand why Clicia didn't correct the bank clerk. It couldn't possibly be true. After learning that Clicia was a member of the royal family, she was immediately escorted to the VIP room of the secret bank. The heroine awkwardly asked if she could really stay here. The bank manager, Madame Sigret, told her not to worry, as there was no way she would let her wait outside. In the main hall, they offered special treatment and terms of service for members of the royal family, but the madam was unaware of the Empress's arrival. The heroine wanted to explain the whole situation, but realized no one would believe the crazy story. Suddenly, Madame Sigrid realized this might be confidential information and that she shouldn't be questioning the Empress. So she said to Her Majesty, "You don't have to explain. Everyone has their secrets. Now, let's talk about the withdrawal. Withdrawing from that bank account, unfortunately, is not possible right now. Your father set a 20-year term, so you can't access the money until you are 30 or with the consent of your trustee." Isaac Mezzarino. The heroine was stunned. How could her father do this? Clicia explained that she urgently needed cash and asked if there was another way. Madame Sigrid told her that she had every right to withdraw from her legal husband's account, and when she said husband, she was clearly referring to the emperor. Clicia asked in confusion, "Wait, does the Empress have the right to use state funds without the ruler's knowledge?" The woman explained that only applied to the state budget, but the Emperor's personal account was accessible to his wife at any time. According to the government contract, the bank allows spouses to manage these assets. The heroine told them to get to the point. Madame Sigret happily announced that if the lady wished to make a withdrawal, they could provide it from His Majesty's account at any time. Clicia couldn't believe it was that easy. Come to think of it, this was a mess of their own making. The mistake stemmed from a miscalculation at the Imperial Palace, and more importantly, they hadn't even filed for divorce yet. By taking the money, the heroine was, in effect, agreeing to the compensation. During this time, Eugene had been waiting for the young lady in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He couldn't believe he was actually waiting for her. Every time he saw Clicia, she seemed stranger and more unusual than before. Behind her eccentric personality, many suspicious things were hidden. Just when Eugene thought he had her figured out, something completely inexplicable happened again. Suddenly, the protagonist heard footsteps approaching him. He opened his eyes wide when the girl called out to him. The heroine apologized for being late, explaining that she had to take care of some paperwork. Eugene's jaw nearly dropped when he saw the black card. It was a secret supreme card reserved for their most distinguished clients, with fewer than 10 in the entire empire. The heroine told the Director General that it was time for them to go, because they had an extremely important matter to attend to. Madame Sigrid peeked out from behind the door, looking in surprise at the dark-haired man. The woman had overheard the Empress call the man Director General, without a doubt. A man whose wealth exceeded the entire budget of some countries. That had to be Homer Laken. The madam just couldn't figure out why so many important people were showing up at the same time. The Emperor once again slammed a stack of documents in his advisor's face. His Majesty was furious. He was really losing control this month. Ian couldn't understand how his request had been denied. The problem was the royal family hadn't had a precedent for divorce in generations. It turned out they had recently discovered a law stating that for a divorce, both spouses had to be present to give their consent. Such a rule was likely in place to prevent the Emperor from abusing his power. Ian sighed wearily and demanded that Miss Clicia be brought before him. But just recently, a messenger from the Majorino family had reported that the Viscount's daughter was missing. The Emperor flew into a rage, roaring for those fools to find her immediately. All the government officials rushed out of the Emperor's office, afraid they might suddenly, cease to exist. Ian gasped for air, trying to calm himself down. Then he collapsed into his chair in frustration. It seemed the girl had run away to escape exile, but the Emperor didn't care whose daughter she was. But then Ian suddenly recalled the description of the girl and the fact that Sir Isaac used fire magic in battle. The image of Sasha flashed in his mind, along with her angry question, what had they been fighting for all these years? Then came her confident declaration that their empire forbade slavery. The firestorm that had leveled the entire building made everything crystal clear because the Emperor finally figured it out. The advisor, Mary, went to find Ryan to get a physical description of Clicia Majorino to begin the search. The Knight Commander said she had scarlet hair, almond-shaped eyes, a slightly round face, and an innocent expression. Oh, and she was wearing a prison uniform with the number 33358. Mary told Sir Ryan to stop joking, as this was a direct order from the Emperor, but the blonde man wasn't kidding. The Imperial advisor decided to just ignore the part about the prison uniform. But when the commander said in a dead serious tone that it was the absolute truth, he froze on the spot. Ryan smiled slyly and asked the advisor if he was prepared to take responsibility if he didn't write that part down and the information turned out to be true. Mary turned around and looked at the Knight Commander in confusion. The Emperor walked in and asked his advisor why he hadn't yet left for the Viscount's estate. The man replied that His Majesty had only given the order a few hours ago, and he hadn't had time to prepare. As the Emperor began to use an ice rune, a suspiciously gentle smile appeared on Ian's face. Mary yelped in fear, saying he would leave immediately. Ryan smiled as he watched the advisor hastily jot down all the information about the girl. Suddenly, the blonde man asked the Count if he was going to see Isaac Majorino, because he wanted to go with him. Ryan had some personal business in Schumalin, so the Imperial advisor had no objection at all. Mary handed over all the information he had collected on Miss Clicia to Sir Hans. He ordered the flyers to be submitted as soon as possible, as the matter was extremely urgent. Ryan reminded the Count that they were in a hurry, and Mary shouted that he was well aware. Then he told Sir Hans not to disappoint him and sped off. But just then, one of Mr. Hans's subordinates ran up and told him the bill for the gymnasium renovation had arrived. Sir Hans handed off the flyer duty to another person, telling him to finish the task and deliver it to headquarters. The man added that it was a direct order from the Emperor, so he should hurry. According to the flyer, they were looking for an important person, and the reward was 500,000 rule. But what really caught the kid's attention was the prisoner number 3358. The kid from Shumalin skipped happily, holding 2 loaves of bread. He was excited because he could eat extra today, but suddenly he heard a noise nearby. Then the kid was slammed against a wall, dropping both loaves of bread. The lavishly dressed nobleman grinned a twisted smile, saying he had finally caught the little rat. It was that kid, the son of some high-ranking official. The guy swore he would catch that red-headed punk sooner or later, but for now, he was going to deal with this boy. The nobleman raised his fist, roaring that he would make the kid pay for embarrassing him. The kid squeezed his eyes shut in fear, expecting a punch to the face. The heroine stopped him with a powerful kick to the guy's side. If this idiot were in Clicia's territory, she would have definitely broken his legs. So this nobleman should consider himself lucky. The little boy, looking confused, thanked her for her help. The heroine smiled and asked the kid if he really didn't remember her, the one he had shared his bread with. The kid quickly realized who she was. This girl was the big bro everyone was talking about. First, Eugene waited for her to get a card, and now he was following her on the street, which completely confused the kid. The heroine took a small money pouch from her pocket. It was enough money to get to Shumalin, and besides that, Clicia also asked him to deliver a letter. The letter would grant him entry into any institution, and the lady also promised to hire him to work at her estate later. The kid could understand why this big sister was helping him. A warm smile appeared on the heroine's face. She patted the kid's head and said gently that she completely understood he had a hard life back home. But this was the only way Clicia could help him, so she told the kid to wait for her there. Soon, the heroine said goodbye to the boy. All this time, Eugene had been with a girl. The lady was very kind to the kid, so the young man wondered if they knew each other from before. The heroine replied playfully that she was just repaying a favor. Despite Clicia's noble birth, it was clear from the beginning that she was not like other aristocrats. Where else could you find a noble woman who knew martial arts? Clicia explained that she grew up on the front lines, so she never really noticed class differences. Her title had made her blind to the struggles of common people, but thanks to that same title, the heroine could now at least help them. Clicia seemed to realize she had said a bit too much and apologized to her companion. She showed him the black card, assuring him that she could definitely repay the money this time. This girl had royal blood, had been on the battlefield since childhood, possessed a rare fire rune, and now had a black card. But more importantly, what exactly was her relationship with the Emperor? Eugene suddenly realized he absolutely did not want to let this girl go, but he didn't know how to make her stay. The heroine announced that it was time for them to leave. As soon as Tom called her, Clicia turned around. As far as the young man knew, he had already scored over 90 points. Remembering this, the heroine confirmed his words. Clicia herself had told Eugene that once he scored over 90 points, she would willingly let him take her. And just a short while ago, the lady herself had said he scored 95 points. Eugene took a step closer to Clicia, reminding her that she had said he could have her. So now he was curious if the lady's words still held. The heroine confidently stated that doing so would be a very bad idea. Jokes aside, she couldn't actually let herself be kidnapped, not even if she agreed to it. To be honest, Clicia didn't know what had gotten into Tom at that moment or why he had acted that way. The protagonist told the young lady that she had piqued his interest, but she felt that only happened after she got the card. Eugene replied that wasn't at all. He was just worried they would lose contact after she paid him back. He wanted to get to know the young lady on a deeper level, but it was as if there was an insurmountable wall between them. When the protagonist asked if there was another way, the heroine froze and looked at him in confusion. Eugene was a little surprised when she suddenly turned away, as if something had displeased her. The young woman announced that they were going to the bank now. Clicia was now 21 years old. She had spent her entire childhood on the battlefield, later finally enjoying a peaceful life on her estate, graduating first in her class from Shumalin Academy, and, as part of her curriculum, reading over 100 novels about Northern Dukes. The only problem was she had no actual dating experience, a fact that greatly annoyed her. And now, this jerk who knew he was charming was trying to seduce her. Eugene didn't understand. Didn't the young lady want this? Was she not happy with him? Whatever. The Northern Duke wasn't going to let her go now. No way. The heroine turned around and told the Director General to listen very carefully. She was about to get back to the point when a flyer suddenly slapped her in the face, containing some very explosive content. The air instantly froze, as if everyone was frozen, waiting to see what would happen next and how they would react. Eugene desperately tried to hold back his laughter. The whole thing was just too funny to him. But the moment the young woman indignantly asked what that was, his expression became serious and focused again. Eugene approached the girl, trying to figure out what was going on and what had gotten her so worked up. He widened his eyes in surprise when he saw the contents of the flyer and realized the gravity of the situation. Clicia Majorino, age 21, wanted for questioning in connection with a serious crime. The flyer described a young woman with bright red hair and almond-shaped eyes. Number 3358, currently at large, wanted for a felony. A warning stated that the fugitive possesses great power and should be approached with extreme caution if encountered. By emergency decree of the royal family, the reward was 500,000 rule, equivalent to the price of 100 houses. Meanwhile, Ryan's horse caught up with the carriage speeding down the road. The Knight Commander knocked on the carriage window, calling for Count Mary. The Imperial advisor poked his head out of the carriage, and Ryan immediately noticed the guy looked like he was about to throw up. As soon as the carriage stopped, Count Mary threw up violently. Ryan said the advisor needed to be stronger, but Mary retorted that they had been racing at full speed for a whole week. The blonde man declared, "You can't just sit in a carriage all the time. You should at least ride a horse occasionally and get some fresh air." Then, the Knight Commander interjected that they would part ways here. Ryan had previously mentioned he had personal business in Shumalin, so Mary asked what it was. The blonde man just answered mysteriously that he needed to confirm something. The Count found this strange. He couldn't recall Sir Ryan ever voluntarily leaving the capital. The Viscount, lying in bed with an ice pack on his head, greeted the Imperial advisor. Then, Isaac Mezzarino began to cough violently, as if he were about to cough up a lung. "My sincerest apologies. Count Mary, I'm not feeling well," the man said. The advisor explained that he was here to find out when Clicia was last in contact, but the Viscount started coughing again. Isaac said that his health had been declining ever since his daughter went missing, and now he couldn't even get out of bed. Mary saw through the act, so he didn't understand why the Viscount didn't want to find his own daughter. Clicia's father, on the other hand, hoped the Imperial advisor hadn't grown suspicious. The Viscount said sadly that he didn't know where his daughter went in the middle of the night, but hoped she would be found soon. The Imperial advisor sighed heavily. He apologized to the Viscount, but said he had to say this, then reached for his briefcase. According to Article 12, relatives of the royal family are obligated to take all measures to protect them. This meant that Viscount Mezzarino had to use all available resources to find Miss Clicia. The Viscount explained that he was short-staffed and couldn't spare anyone for the search. But Count Mary wasn't buying it, reminding Sir Isaac that the Red Lion Knights served him. The Viscount protested that his knightly order had been disbanded after the war, but Mary argued that now was the time to bring them back, a perfect opportunity. Even if it was a clerical error, Miss Clicia is currently the Emperor's wife in the eyes of the law, and we cannot ignore that. Count Mary was counting on the Viscount's cooperation, so he promised to provide all necessary resources. Isaac turned his back to the advisor and replied that he would deal with it as soon as he felt better. The Imperial advisor thought about all the trouble he had gone through to get here. Suddenly, he collapsed to the floor. Viscount Isaac leaped out of bed, and the terrified maids rushed to the advisor to see what was wrong. Count Mary said he was just exhausted from the journey, and the long trip had made him suddenly dizzy, but the Viscount still had to obey the Emperor's orders. Isaac collapsed back onto the bed, wailing that his heart was suddenly in excruciating pain. Count Mary, in turn, announced that his vision was starting to go dark. Who would win this showdown? The Imperial Guard loudly called for the attention of all citizens. An emergency arrest warrant has been issued for Clicia Majorino, and anyone who sees her should report to the guards immediately. It even got to the point where guards would approach and question every girl with scarlet hair. Hiding in an alley, Eugene told the young woman they could rest here for a bit. Looking at the flyer with her picture on it, the heroine cursed under her breath. That blonde, pretty boy knight at the palace was the culprit behind all this. and Clicia swore to deal with him personally. The situation was getting tricky, so the man asked her if she had a safe place to hide. The heroine laughed nervously, thinking that the Director General's offer was still on the table. A short while later, the protagonists arrived at the capital's port, Tamarica. Eugene offered his hand to help the young lady out of the carriage. Now, the heroine could finally get a good look at the capital's largest port, but Clicia still couldn't figure out how things had gotten so messed up. First, they unjustly threw her in prison, which led Clicia to escape, and now she was a wanted criminal. But what really bothered the heroine was why this man kept staring at her like that. Her thoughts were interrupted by the Director General, who smiled and told her they were about to set sail. The heroine nodded. Right now, he was the only person she could trust. We have to go by sea? Clicia asked the Director General. She thought they could just hide somewhere, but Eugene said that was a problem. The bounty on you is too high, Mississippi. I can't just hide you, as I would have to involve other people. Some of them would surely be tempted by that money, and none of those people are completely trustworthy. We might even attract unwanted attention on our way to the port, so we have to move quickly. Wait, you have a ship ready? Clicia asked the Director General in confusion. The heroine was stunned when he said they would be crossing the ocean on his ship. The young woman started looking around, trying to figure out which ship they were talking about. When she saw it, her jaw dropped, and she stared at it in utter confusion. Seriously? Clicia asked, bewildered. Can that thing even go far? Eugene called her miss and pointed in the direction she should be looking. He looked up and pointed to his ship, a vessel of absolutely enormous size. It was equipped with supercharged magic engines and hundreds of cabins offering all sorts of entertainment. The cruise ship, belonging to Tom Tourism, was named the Tabosonic. The protagonist was stunned by the ship's immense size. A little scared, she asked the director, "Are we really going to sail on that thing?" Eugene simply nodded. The man held out his hand, and she took it. The handsome, dark-haired man mysteriously told her that this voyage was prepared for her alone. Clicia tried not to show it, but she had been feeling very down lately. She possessed incredible courage and willpower, which helped her face any adversity that came her way. But the successive blows, from the marriage to being wanted by the authorities, seemed to be too much for her to bear. But now, on this ship, she felt like she could finally catch her breath. That kind of thing would wear anyone down. She could finally take a deep breath and spread her arms wide. Eugene asked in confusion what she was doing, and Clicia replied that it was every girl's dream. Suddenly, Clicia said to the director that it might be strange to ask now, but wasn't he worried that helping a fugitive on the run would put his flawless reputation at great risk? Also, the capital would surely notice a ship like this suddenly setting sail. Eugene suggested they discuss it all in detail over dinner. Our heroine agreed, and the hero helped her to her seat. Then he snapped his fingers with a flourish. Servants immediately gathered around Clicia, ready to fulfill her every wish. The director sat down opposite her and assured her they were safe. For now, the Tabosonic is traveling along an exclusive route approved by the Furza Empire, so there's nothing to worry about. The man then took out a map and slapped it on the table. Furthermore, our destination is a super popular spot among Tom Tourism's clients, the Principality of Floria, to be exact. It's the only place in the entire empire with true independence. The protagonist's eyes lit up when she heard the name. The Daily News says you have to go there at least once in your life. It's the #1 resort and the top choice for honeymoons. Eugene smiled in agreement. He picked up a glass of expensive liquor. He then asked the lady if she was finally ready to reveal her true identity to him. If the girl he was helping turn out to be the deposed Empress, he would be taking a huge risk indeed. Clicia pondered his words. The director had indeed stuck his neck out for her, so she felt there was no point in keeping secrets anymore. So Clicia agreed to tell him everything. Floria was a beautiful island located in the south of the vast ashy continent, a real tourist hotspot. The climate there was mild, comfortable all year round, with an emerald sea and brilliant coral reefs. It was no exaggeration to say that people called this magical island a paradise on earth, full of wonder and beauty. Walking barefoot on the warm sand, the protagonist squealed with joy that they had finally arrived in Floria. Eugene followed behind, holding her shoes, watching her excitement with amusement. Clicia happily told the Duke that the newspapers didn't lie. The sand was really as soft as silk. The man reminded her that running around barefoot could be dangerous, but the young girl confidently said she would be fine. But suddenly, she ran headfirst into something. Clicia fell to the ground, completely bewildered, and asked who had put a pillar on the shore. As it turned out, she was very wrong. The handsome, bronze-skinned man apologized to the young lady and offered a hand to help her up. The blonde man with green eyes and a charming smile asked with great concern if she was hurt. The protagonist was speechless, completely captivated, staring at him in awe like a starstruck fan. Standing before her was none other than the man she had heard about, the 12th Prince of Floria, Andrew Fami de Floria. Realizing who he was, Clicia jumped up and greeted him, "Your Highness." But the blonde man told her to dispense with the formalities. The protagonist stared at his bare chest and stammered that she would definitely keep it casual. Eugene reminded them of his presence, and Andrew immediately said cheerfully that it had been a long time. Clicia was thrilled that the Duke knew the prince, but Eugene explained it was just business. The blonde man was surprised to realize this beautiful girl was his friend's companion. He then took a vibrant flower from his necklace, pondering how to compliment her. The prince tucked the flower behind her ear, and the heroine froze, her heart racing. The golden hibiscus was a plant unique to Floria, so Andrew thought it would perfectly complement her fiery red hair. The prince happily welcomed the guests to their beautiful Floria and promised them an unforgettable and fun vacation. Eugene knew the blonde kid was up to his old tricks, turning on the charm the moment he saw a girl. But our hero didn't realize he was playing right into her hands, as Clicia's type was the Northern Duke. Eugene glanced at the girl and noticed her face had turned bright red. Flustered with shyness, she approached the prince and boldly asked what he meant by an unforgettable vacation prepared for all of them. Andrew suggested visiting the night market, which had many interesting things and entertainment for tourists. Unable to stand the tense atmosphere, the man decided to intervene in the conversation between the two young people. He told my lady that it was time for them to return to their lodgings. My lady's current makeup and attire were not quite suitable for the region, so Eugene suggested finding something more appropriate. The Duke's actions certainly piqued Andrew's interest. As Clicia chattered on about needing something the color of the hibiscus flower, Eugene turned and shot the blonde man a cold glare. Andrew chuckled, as he hadn't expected that at all. Later, at the Rakin residence in Floria, the 12th prince burst through the door to greet his dear friend once again. Eugene was exuding a dark aura, but he still managed to force a smile. They had only been apart for less than 30 minutes, but the blonde man asked his friend not to be so cold. Andrew asked the dark-haired man where his companion was, and Eugene said she had gone shopping. It seems she's enjoying picking out clothes, so it's going to take a while. When the blonde man said with regret that he hoped to admire her beauty again, Eugene's gaze instantly hardened. Sensing the Duke's mood shift, Andrew held up his hands and told his friend to calm down. Times may have changed, but does a prince really have a nerve to pursue a woman who belongs to Lord's servant? Eugene said Clicia was not his woman, but Andrew decided not to meddle in their affairs from then on. The prince decided to change the subject, telling the dark-haired man he had heard some very interesting rumors. It sounds like things at the Imperial Palace are about to become a total mess. Andrew was curious if Eugene was the one pulling the strings behind all the commotion. Though, I guess what happens on the continent isn't really his business. He still wanted to remain neutral. After all, Floria is their treasured jewel, so Andrew won't let it become a pawn in the Empire's games. Meanwhile, at the Majorino estate, Isaac Majorino crossed his arms and spoke to Count Miri. The Viscount demanded that the Imperial advisor put an end to this farce. Miri replied that he could barely understand what the man was saying. The useless fellow had been lying in bed for weeks without even moving. The Count, on the other hand, was perfectly content. He could lie there for the rest of his life to avoid work. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room. The girl, out of breath, announced that a letter had just arrived from the capital. Miri heard that a bounty of 500,000 rubles had been placed on Clicia's head, and he nearly jumped out of bed. Moreover, she was reportedly seen at the docks in the middle of the night with a suspicious man. All they knew for now was that they had boarded a ship belonging to Tom Holdings. Miri leaped out of bed, saying he would return to the capital at once, that this was his fault and he would fix it. But Isaac Majorino suddenly stopped him. Sometimes you have to to let the children fly on their own to help them grow. So the Viscount hadn't wanted to get directly involved, but now that some lowlife was messing with his daughter, Isaac could no longer stand by and do nothing. He ordered Alice to prepare everything for their departure, as he was also going to the capital. Meanwhile, on another front, Count Murray was on his way to Viscount Majorino's estate. The captain of the guard, Ryan Bartier de Furza, headed straight for Shamron Academy. Clicia Majorino, the girl who became a true empress by a strange twist of fate. Ryan felt that when they first met, there was nothing to worry about. But somehow, she was involved with Eugene's servant, and there also seemed to be some connection between his older brother and her father. Now Ryan just needed to find the missing piece. The best way to do that was to launch his own investigation. The door to the room creaked open slowly, and a woman appeared in the doorway. The current chairman of the Northern Duchy's Research Center, Cornelia Ember. She asked what he wanted. Ryan stood before her and said it was a pleasure to meet her. On Clicia Majorino's official record, there were only 2 lines of information about her. A graduate of Shamron Academy's architecture program and a founder of the CIGS Science Association. The goals of this mysterious association were unclear, as was the exact meaning of its name. All signs pointed to it being just an ordinary student interest group, but was that really the case? Ryan was about to introduce himself, but Cornelia suddenly said that in CIGS, a person's identity was not as important as their passion for research. Freedom of scientific thought is a fundamental right of all citizens of the Empire, and not even the Emperor's authority can suppress it. Ryan didn't understand what was happening and asked the lady to explain what she meant. Cornelia reminded the blonde man that he had requested information about their activities and a list of all CIGS members, but such information could not be given out casually. So the dark-haired lady asked him the purpose of his visit. Ryan hadn't expected to learn anything significant, but now it seemed this was more than just an ordinary organization. The man grinned and said their goals were aligned, as he too was passionate about research. He had always been fascinated by these things, especially since there was no more efficient group in the entire empire. Cornelia's cheeks turned slightly red. She decided to give him an entrance exam to make sure he was truly a good fit for their group. Ryan found the whole thing comical, as even the top talents at the capital's academy called him a genius. Cornelia began with the first question. She asked him to choose the correct color combination and quickly rattled off several options. Ryan was taken aback when she pulled out a stopwatch and started the timer. The man was completely baffled, wondering if this was some kind of code. It seemed there was a hidden meaning in these color combinations, which meant the handsome blonde man would have to take a wild guess. Time was up, which meant Ryan had failed the test. The captain of the guard shot up from his seat and asked the girl to wait. He wanted to double-check if the question was phrased correctly. Suddenly, Cornelia Ember stopped in her tracks. This was the girl who had submitted a paper on interpretive geometry at age 11 and proved the Kurtz mathematical theorem at 14. By the age of 17, the scientific community recognized her as a genius and awarded her the title of scholar. But she turned down a high-profile job in the capital, choosing to stay at the small Shamron Academy. Rumor had it that she was drawn to a specific field of research. Ryan asked if the question wasn't supposed to come with some instructions. Cornelia had asked them to choose the correct color combination without saying what they represented at all. You don't even know the basics, and you're sure you want to join CIGS? The girl asked the captain of the guard sharply. Moved by his eagerness, Cornelia decided to give him one last chance. She handed him a piece of paper and told Ryan to study the basics on his own and then come back for the test. The paper was filled with symbols and numbers. Cornelia added that the gates of truth only open for those dedicated to knowledge. She left quickly while Ryan studied the paper. Shortly after, the blonde man headed to the library at Shamron Academy. Just as he thought, the code on the paper was just the library's book numbering system. The captain of the guard was still wondering why such a serious organization would have its headquarters in such a remote place. The deeper he got, the more he wanted to unravel this mystery completely. The handsome blonde man decided to dive right into the first book, thinking it would be the fastest way to find the truth and dig up the facts. The first book was titled The Northern Duke's Undying Love. Besides being the captain of the guard, Ryan Barthier de Furza also owned a great deal of land in the northern part of the empire. Moreover, he owned this land as a duke, which made him a true Northern Duke in his own right. Then Ryan started flipping through the second book, in which the girl spent most of the story begging the Duke to let her go. The third book was all about how the Northern Duke was obsessed with his beloved. There was another book about how to win the heart of the Northern ruler. Ryan slammed the latest book shut. In the face of true knowledge, he felt like an idiot. A person comes to realize just how insignificant they are. Ryan finally understood what was going on here. Clicia was probably with Eugene because of his fancy title. It seemed Ryan would have to step up his game and show them who the real Northern Duke was.